Welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the journey of the aquatic Neptune through the sign of Aries in its first phase from the 30th of March through to the 10th of December. That includes the retrograde period as well. But Neptune is going to make some very profound connections to other players, not least Saturn, which joins up with Aries from the 26th of May through to the end of August. Now, the connection between them doesn't become precise until the 20th of February next year. But we are going to see Saturn and Neptune aligning in a nearly exact way with Pluto in Aquarius, but also Uranus in Gemini, which begins from the 7th of July for 4 months. And that's a golden triangle. But we need to be mindful that Neptune is about water, the sign of Aries is about fire, but also Saturn, when it joins up, is in its full in the sign of Aries. So that's not such a good combination. It's a massive topic. I actually haven't rushed into doing this video because I wanted to really give it a lot of thought. Neptune's a planet that I have a real connection to in some ways because Neptune's on my first house. People with Neptune on the first house can have a need to be somewhat invisible, which might surprise you. Now, if you have Neptune on the 10th house cusp, the chances are you're going to be wanting to use your creativity, your magic, your flair in some kind of public domain. So Neptune can be very important, particularly when it's on an angle. And the other thing to consider for this year is that because Neptune doesn't go beyond just slightly over 2 degrees, when we have the summer solstice, the autumnal equinox, but also the winter solstice, those earth points are going to forge clashing tense angles to both Neptune and Saturn. So there's going to be trigger points that aren't particularly easy. The other thing is that when Neptune goes into its retrograde and rewinds, it does get back to 29 degrees, so it's still on the anaretic point, and therefore it's still very close to the fixed star Shiat, which has quite a fearsome reputation. Now, we've just seen a disaster in Egypt with a TAURUS submarine, very Shiat energy, and of course Mercury, the planet of communication, but in some ways of travel, and Neptune clustered together just before Neptune makes that move into Aries. And of course Mercury will swap and inverse into Pisces. So this is a very, very important time for us all collectively, because I'm going to share with you what I feel Neptune has represented through the years in the sign of Pisces, which began in 211, came back in 212. Then we had the North Node in Pisces in 212, and of course that's been repeated, the True Node, since the 11th of January this year. So it's big stuff. It makes its way through each zodiac sign just a tad under 14 years, and its entire circuit is 165 years. So it's 164 years if we take into account this is just the first blush since Neptune was first in the fire sign of Aries, which is very much about initiation. But that connection between Neptune, and that's going to be followed by Saturn's arrival in Aries on the 26th of May through to the end of August, is also going to see the pair angle to Pluto and Uranus. Uranus in Gemini from the 7th of July through to the 7th of October. So on the 26th of August, not quite exactly, we get what's called a golden triangle. So the angles between Pluto in the sign of the collective Aquarius link into the first zodiac sign, initiation of Saturn and Neptune, but then Pluto are trine to Uranus, but Uranus and Pluto forging sextiles to the duo of Saturn and Neptune. So this is really powerful stuff, and that golden trine is going on broadly from 25 through to 28. What does that mean? So I'm going to unpack all of this. I'm going to share with you some of the themes that I feel that make Neptune very positive. I feel it's a planet that doesn't get enough attention, certainly on YouTube, but I'm also going to dive in figuratively into the challenges that Neptune can provide and what can we expect in the sign of Aries. I feel there are going to be some fierce challenges, but I also feel there are going to be some opportunities. And then I'll share on screen the exact event chart for when Neptune makes its grand entrance, because taking into account the prime meridian and universal time, it pitches up in the sign of Aries in the 9th house, very much about knowledge, travel, higher education, but also justice and principles. And it's also worth noting it's immediately in contact with Pluto, not quite within 3 degrees, and Pluto on that event chart is in the 7th house, open enemies in traditional astrology, but also how we connect in our relationships. So I feel that the connection between Neptune and Pluto isn't getting talked about enough on this event, because the alignment between Neptune and Pluto has been ongoing since the 1940s in a sextile, and it's going to stay in a sextile between them through to 2040. So that's another strand to this event that goes beyond just saying, well, what's Neptune in Aries going to be like? We have to see that big picture. I'm then going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs to give you a flavour of what you can expect from now through to essentially the end of the year. But if you are a late mutable sign, so that is in order Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius or Pisces from around about 27 degrees, or you're an early cardinal sign in order, so Aries up to about 3 degrees, maybe 4, Cancer, Libra or Capricorn, you're going to feel the presence of both Neptune and then subsequently Saturn in a very keen way, because that is going to be triggering those angles in either a conjunction in the case of Aries, but Cancer and Capricorn in squares and Libra in an opposition. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. If you are new here, this is very much a community. We do try to interact with every single comment. If you've got one, please share it. If you are a regular visitor to YouTube, thank you so much for your company once more. New or established, your views and interactions are truly appreciated. Now, I'm a consultant astrologer. If you'd like to have a one-to-one with me, please check out my testimonials below, or take advantage of my new video astrology reading service. It's not a one-to-one, but I present your forecast in video format and email it to you, and it's proving hugely popular. Please see the link below for more. You can also take advantage of my long-standing personal horoscope package, your life roadmap report, which will give you searing insights into the patterns that are played out in your life so far, but also your 12 months transits, totally unique to each person it's produced for, 30% off. They're fantastic value. If you're emerging in your interest into astrology, they really can guide you. However, if you don't know your natal chart and you would like to know it, you can download your free natal chart from me, and it's the best natal chart out there. If it was a lager, well, you get the drift, but it really is cracking. I genuinely don't feel there is one that's better. So please see below for all of those special features. We're also now a membership scheme on YouTube. If you'd like to become a member, that would be an honour. We have got some people who've contributed so far. I think the bottom tier is about $3 a month, and your support on that would be greatly appreciated. So this event begins on the 30th of March at 12:01 p.m. Universal Time. Why do I use Universal? Why do I use the Prime Meridian? It's not because I'm in the UK. I'm actually not even in England. It's because that I feel gives us an opportunity to reflect collectively on events, because it's something that is common to us all. Now, you may find that some astrologers around the world will produce their charts based on LA or New York or Sydney, wherever, but that's why I do it, because I feel it's something we can all lean into. So on the screen now is the event chart from a natal perspective, and I'm using Placida. So that gives us an ascendant in a very positive way in Leo. So Leo can be, it's obviously a fire sign as well, can be very self-confident, charismatic, linking back to the position of Neptune in the sign of Aries. But that first ninth, because you can see Neptune's in the ninth house, I feel that's really exciting. So in this seeding chart, for what will be a period of time that goes on through to 2039, when Neptune makes its first move into Taurus, this event chart is going to be very influential. And that ninth house tells us a lot, I feel, because what we can see, of course, with Neptune is it can help us to reach a higher dimension in terms of our spiritual purpose. But of course, Neptune does have some challenging influences, and the ninth house can be the rule of law. But it also can be about broadly shared knowledge, higher education, and equally travel. So those areas are likely to be hot topics, literally, because of course the host is a hot sign, and if the first decan and the overall ruler of the sign is the feisty Mars. So that's interesting, the ninth house. But let's think about Pluto in house 7. The 7th house is where we connect to people. It can be where we put our boundaries down. But I feel that the clue between the two is that Pluto can be an influence that's very much to do with things like dictators and people who use dark powers in order to hold control and power over us. And certainly since Pluto moved into Aquarius for the 11 weeks in 23, and last year from 21 January, its true birthday, through to 2nd September, then back 19 November through to now, phase 3, we've seen the use of the more dispassionate, detached energy of Aquarius, an air sign, very futuristic, but also deeply traditional in some ways. There is a duality. We have seen that Pluto has given or seen some individuals have enormous power. And of course, the sign of Aquarius is community, and one of the ways we all connect these days is digitally. I was reading the other day that one major search engine company, that you would know who I meant, has a higher gross domestic product than Germany. I mean, it's just incredible the power that these people have over us. And the position of Pluto in Aquarius has seen the explosion around AI, robotics, automation. But what we've also seen more recently is a pushback. The people are finding their voices, and the best way to do that is to combine, to come together. So whilst Pluto can be about transformation in a very dynamic and constructive way, if we want to evolve, if we're interested in personal development, the link to Neptune can be absolutely splendid. So what we have had for some years is Pluto in the business sign of Capricorn, with Neptune in the water sign of Pisces, but Earth, which is Capricorn, carries water. So they've been conducting each other. Now what we've got is the air of Aquarius oxygenating, even though Neptune is, of course, a very aquatic planet, oxygenating the potential for inspiration, but also for people's emotions to flow and be expressed in, I feel, a more passionate way. So it's going to be very, very interesting, but I think we are going to see more collective action where people will find their voices. And the intriguing thing is, although people often complain about their posts being removed on certain social media platforms for very, very minor reasons, what we're going to see is that collective between people is going to really start to ignite in a very exciting way over the next few years. Doesn't mean to say it will be a panacea and perfect. We're going into an extraordinarily complex time, if not already deeply in it. So those are the big principles. So that ninth house energy, I feel, is also about personal freedom, independence. It can be about our desire to be flexible. So although the sign of Aries is a cardinal sign about new beginnings, just know that despite the fact that Neptune in Aries does have some downsides, and as a planet does have its faults, there is the potential for inspiration and the link back to Pluto, which will be ignited even more with the Golden Triangle and Uranus coming into the mix through the summer months. I think we're going to see essentially somewhat of a revolution. And if you followed my channel for a long time, you'll know that one of the things that I try to be is very reasoned, to not invest my personal opinions too much. There may be times when you feel I have, but I try not to do it too much because I understand that people see things in different ways. And you know, there seems to be a polarity between left and right, but actually, do you know, it's not really between left and right. It's between who holds the power and how that affects us all collectively. And that's the true issue. It's not really your politics. You might think it's your politics. It may have been presented to you in the way that it's your politics, but it's just not that simple. So Neptune's going to get up to 2 degrees and 10 minutes by July the 4th, just before the arrival of Uranus, for its annual 158-day retrograde. Now it's going to return to Pisces then, but it only inverses backwards within the anaretic degree, so it's 29 degrees and 22 minutes, so it's still on that critical degree point, but it will return back into the sign of Aries on the 26th. But critically, it reaches an exact conjunction with Saturn on the 20th of February at 0 degrees and 45, 2026. So as I mentioned, if you are late mutable, anything from 27 degrees to early cardinal, you're going to feel this, and you're going to feel it in a very powerful way. And I mentioned, I think, in my intro about the earth points. So the earth points is when we usher in the cardinal quadrants. So the next one now, because we've just had the first with the vernal equinox, the next cardinal quadrant is the summer solstice, and that is on the 21st of June. The autumnal equinox then comes on the 22nd of September, and then the winter solstice on the 21st of December. So each of those are going to be triggers for the position of Neptune and subsequently Saturn that arise on the 26th of May in Aries. So let's just explore some of Neptune's positives. Now, one of the things that I feel that Neptune is very influential around is the unconscious, you know, where we're not always in touch with how we feel, but it can also be about the collective connection. And I think the collective connection has been very powerful over these last 13 and a half, 14 years. It influences our dreams. So if you're someone who does have Neptune in a potent way in your natal chart, say for example connecting to Jupiter, which can expand, your dreams are probably quite incredible, but so can your ability to imagine things but also create things. So whether you're a musician, whether you're an artist, whether you're someone who does installations, whether you work through the field of healing and compassion, again, great gifts here. So if you're a psychic, or you're just someone who's enormously perceptive, if you're someone who enjoys being near water, my Neptune on my first house, love being by water. So another adjective I thought of, immersion. Isn't that a lovely word? But it can of course be about escapism. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't always need to be on the proverbial treadmill. Sometimes we do need to spin out and do something different, whether it is through the aforementioned daydreaming or through listening to inspiring music. But it can be about intangibles. Telepathy, that's something that just seems to be coming back into the common interaction that I've seen people using the concept of telepathy a lot recently. But in terms of prayer, sensitivity, photography, very mystical, intriguing, can be very much to do with welfare. And some would say even socialism, because of the principles of Neptune, and also that compassion, because of course Neptune rules the sign of Pisces. Now, what we've seen recently with Saturn in the last couple of years in the sign of Pisces, we've seen a growing and creeping pushback in terms of people's vulnerabilities, particularly people who may not be very well, and benefits. And we've had another round of cuts just being announced in Britain, and of course we have got in America a big push, it would seem, to deconstruct central departments which are very mindful of providing care. So USAID would be an example of that, and that may be that Saturn is bringing a harsh reality to that more tender energy of Neptune in Pisces. But what about the challenges? Well, Neptune can find it difficult to say no, whether it's to that next drink. So those lack of boundaries, sometimes we can give too much to people. We can be too generous with our time, energy, or compassion, and then we end up feeling empty because people are not appreciating those intangibles. It can also be to do with deception, distortion, erosion. We've seen the sea levels are rising. Some islands in certain parts of the world are now being submerged. But we've also got problems with floods, massive outpourings of rain. We've seen, cars being swept down streets, very frightening stuff. But then in a more sort of interpersonal way, lying, misrepresentation, avoidance, addiction, self-pity, victimhood has become quite the thing over the last 13 or 14 years. But we've also seen disillusionment, but scapegoating, that seems to be quite the thing these days, where whoever raises something that might actually be quite true in terms of decency and honourability, they're scapegoated. So the whistleblower is the one that gets all the abuse. But of course Neptune is also about infections, disease, crime, frauds, and it can challenge our sense of identity, particularly if you have Neptune on the first house, by the way. And it of course can be a very vague influence. And one other word that I came up with was poisons and, well, also gases. So those are some of the more challenging energies. What can we expect with Neptune in Aries or Aries? Well, a little bit of a take on that word, arid. So I feel that we all need to be prepared to embrace our inner cactus. Now that might sound quite an extraordinary combination, particularly as it might actually be quite prickly. But if we think about the potential of the fire and the water, I feel that droughts could become much more of a thing over the next few years, but particularly while Neptune and Saturn are quite close together, which really starts to break down from April next year as Saturn speeds up. So I'm sorry to raise that, but I do feel that that's possible. So what I mean about the inner cactus in a way is that maybe we all need to be more mindful of how we use water. So I think this kind of stuff has come into the public realm a lot more in recent years, but whether it's through filtration, whether it is being mindful if we have a shower, that the water coming onto our body is an organism. So our energy comes from the Aries, Mars, thrust, new beginnings. That could be diminished by picking up some of the things that are contained in waters these days, and that can of course be lots of supposedly safe products, but if you can afford it, any kind of, whether it's using a jug or it is using an adaptation on the tap, or if you can afford something to go under the tap or something to go on the shower head to get those impurities out, go for it, because you're preserving your inner cactus, which needs to consume the water from the arid desert. There may be less around, and we need to use what we've got in a more careful way. So I feel that a hot summer may be in store in the northern hemisphere. We know in Australia in recent years, for example, there's been huge floods, which has been terrifying for people, particularly in a country which can be extremely hot. So I can't really comment on the southern hemisphere picture, but I think in the north we could be in for a hotter summer than has been the case. Unfortunately, and particularly because of the lunar eclipse we just had between the signs of Virgo and Pisces, I feel that infectious diseases could be on the up. Because if you recall, the sign of Virgo is about purity, it's about self-responsibility, it's about hygiene, but it's also about eating properly. It is also about maybe cooking from scratch, cutting down on all the produced and processed food that many of us seem to eat and consume a lot more these days. But because of the position on the other end of the spectrum, where the sun was at the time, Saturn was opposing that moon. So I think it's possible that there could be some health crises that could be coming over this next year or so. And also because we have seen a kind of popular desire for foreign aid to be cut back, so popularist governments will enact that. But sometimes when you cut back on investment of any kind, whether it's in a country's infrastructure, whether it's in the road system, like in Britain, we've got potholes everywhere in the roads, what ends up happening is that cost increases literally further down the road. So, some of the cutting back on inoculations and health prevention, I was reading something the other day about how many more people will get AIDS because of the cutbacks to aid programs. So part of that's coming, I feel, because although Neptune can be about compassion, the sign of Aries, particularly when Saturn arrives, where it's in its full, can be much more authoritarian. And the push there goes from being much more caring of how people feel to much more the tone of, well, it's your life, it's your responsibility, you crack on. Because the sign of Aries is about the individual, it's not about the emotional connection we all have. So I think that is a potential, unfortunately. Now, because of the hot energy of Aries and the water of Neptune, I feel that tsunamis might be something that could increase. Arundell, it's in southwest France, very near to the Spanish border, and it really is devoted to masons, because if you've ever been to France, some of the architecture, particularly in the churches, are just so breathtakingly beautiful. And so that cross basically talks about an environmental event. And I've always felt it is possible that something could start off in Northern Europe, maybe Spain, maybe down in that Bay of Biscay area, that could work its way across the channel. Now, I hope I'm absolutely, totally wrong, but I think that kind of the misuse of nature, we don't realise that we're part of it. We are all part of nature. It's not there to serve us. And whilst we have an attitude of that it's there to serve us, that can be a problem. Now, because of that more masculine approach that I think is coming, you could see a more dismissive attitude to astrology. And it's interesting today, actually, I was reading in a national newspaper about something that is very Aries in a way, and Neptune, and that was remote viewing used in warfare situations. So I was reading about a guy who was asked to identify where Soviet subs were, and he gave the people he was working with in the US Defense Ministry. He gave them the information, and they all thought, you know, this is not going to be true, but he was absolutely correct. But what really surprised me today, I looked underneath the story, because usually when you see stories about astrology or psychic phenomena in popular newspapers, the comments are quite challenging at times, but actually 73% of people thought it was a very viable approach to use psychic phenomenon in a warfare situation. And of course, Aries is the sign of war. So that's interesting, isn't it? Whereas if you read any article in the same kind of popular paper about astrology, it's just the usual stuff about what a load of rubbish. And to be fair, some of the articles are not the best. They're not very well thought through, and all they do is burnish the bad reputation that astrology can have, because they're at a very low frequency, you know, low vibration. They're just basically clickbait, and they're not very meaningful. But what we will find, I believe, because the sign of Aries can be about fire and ignition and therefore fuel, we are going to see new forms of fuel discovered. Now, obviously, we've got a political pushback at the moment towards carbon, fossil fuels, because it's a quick win. And, you know, there is an argument that there are certain people who are getting all the benefits because they're still producing those things. And the people who've been more conscientious about reducing their carbon footprint are now importing the said coal, for example. So one of the things I really like is heritage railways. So that's railways where you have steam trains, and they get all their coal from Poland. And we know that that coal is still under the land in Britain, but no, we get it from Poland. So that's a bit daft. So you can see some of the rationale behind it. But I feel that we will see more and more new types of fuels, and over time, probably by about the time Neptune's preparing to go into Taurus, that will really be something that is properly taking shape. But they've just found in France a huge amount of something called white hydrogen, just huge amounts of it. And it's not what they thought they were going to find, but apparently it's hugely valuable. So new energy sources, because the sign of Aries can be about energy, are certainly possible. But going back to that idea that some people would disparage astrology, tarot, psychic phenomenon, and so on, mind reading or whatever, I feel that there is going to be a bit of a challenge for people like myself who work in these fields, that we know there has been a big upturn in the wider interest, particularly amongst generally younger people in recent years, but there will be others now who want to be even more muscular in their approach in trying to push back and challenge the validity of these things. One of the things that does tickle me is that scientists who I have great respect for will say, for example, Einstein's had some amazing principles, and then you'll get the latest thing which come out recently, the latest edict. Scientists now believe, how many times have you heard that phrase? And actually they don't feel that he had it all right, you know, and this happens all the time, whereas astrology, which doesn't claim to be a science, it is using the science of the movement of the planets. And before you say, well, you know, Western tropical astrology is not based on the movement of the planets, well, no, it's based on the seasons. You can't compare apples and oranges. So obviously Vedic astrology is based on the moving planets in that sense, or the moving constellations. So the constellations in Western tropical astrology are purely there as a theme. And it's the seasons that divides the year. So like I mentioned before, the 4 quadrants of 13 weeks on each of the Earth points. So just be aware that there will be some people who will want to disparage because they don't actually understand what astrology or psychic phenomenon is truly about. So what Neptune can do, because Neptune can be about essentially can, in a sense, I feel, about trying to slander. That was the word I was looking for. If you've ever lived around or near a neighbour, for example, or someone in your community, or even had someone in your family who's not a very truthful person, you know, I know the old saying is that we all have our own reality, but there is also such a thing as facts. So if someone represents facts in a wrong way in order to create a particular emotional energy to create an impression, that's very Neptunian. It is the planet of propaganda. So really be conscious that as this event starts, sorry to look away, we do have Mercury in retrograde, conjunct Venus in retrograde, conjunct the node in the sign of Pisces, conjunct Saturn. If ever we're entering a period where the battle for the need for truth is even more going to be sacrificed on the altar of people's egos and the need for control, it is now. This is a seminal time for us all. So we all need to awake from the dreamlike state of Neptune in Pisces, which has made us perhaps a little bit too sort of tripped out. Oh, that's another thing that's going to happen now. I feel that it's going to be a much more authoritarian approach to not just recreational drugs, but also to allopathic drugs, to the use of drugs. There will be a desire to get the cost down. Now, of course, if that works well with personal or public information campaigns to try and help people to cook better or to get more exercise, that would be a very positive thing to do. But if it's just solely designed to reduce cost, to get some kind of immediate improvement to the balance sheet without worrying about what the inevitable consequences will be down the track, what we will see is more pain and more suffering. So any kind of cutback to funding does and will have an impact on physical, emotional and spiritual well-being. And having those guys all in retrograde as this event starts is a bit worrying, to be honest. In fact, it's more than worrying. It's very concerning indeed. So Neptune in Aries. So in its very highest frequency, it can be a time when we become much more conscious of selflessness. And because Aries can be about action, how we can take action in a selfless way, so we can work on ego. And of course the sign of Aries and the ruler Mars can be about our identity. Now, ego's not necessarily a bad thing. When I was a kid, no one used the word narcissist. It was an ego. He was an ego tripper. And now narcissist must be the most used word in the English vocabulary. However, because of the more feisty energy of Aries and the more principled spiritual energy of Neptune at its best, it could see people prepared to fight and defend what they believe in. And believe me, that is very exciting, that concept. Now, because Neptune, along with the traditional ruler of the sign of Pisces, can be very much about religions and can be about our values and our philosophies in particular, what we may see is some new ways of being or some reinterpretations, because Aries energy can be where we re-inject energy. So anything that's ongoing, that's positive, we find a way to give it more spark. But of course it can also be where things start from scratch. But as I mentioned before, Neptune in the ninth house, that can it can mean, when it comes to legal matters, for example, the ninth house, very, very important to represent oneself in a truthful and factual way. And fraud and dishonesty could become very much to the fore. So when we go into that golden triangle period, which, as I mentioned, it really begins in earnest once Uranus moves into Gemini on the 7th of July through to 7th of October. But it's broadly going to happen from the time that Neptune is connecting with Pluto, from the 30th of March, and not yet with Uranus, but once Saturn arrives, that's another constituent part. Then when we have Uranus move into Gemini, just before then Venus moves into Libra. So Venus is joining in as well. So it's going to be a glorious time. Now, at that point, you're going to see a lot of disquiet, which is building up now, and there will be people who will be accused by those who have the hands on the levers of power, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Hungary, whether it's in Georgia, whether it's in Greece, whether it's in Spain with protests about tourism, whether it's in Serbia, whether it's outside certain motor dealership centres in America. And I must stress, I am absolutely, totally against any kind of violence, but certainly people's desire, whether they're expressing their disquiet about what's going on in Palestine, whether it's a great discomfort to the events that have taken place over the last couple of months in terms of the American government and stance to what is the most evil regime in Russia. And if you're going to write in and argue with me, bring it on, because they are. And it's a huge strategic mistake. If you don't like me talking about politics, I'm sorry, but it is, because if you break down the stability of Europe, it will affect America eventually. And it may be a symbiotic relationship that has had its faults. And a lot, again, that the administration have been saying is absolutely perfectly fair. There has to be pulling of the weights. But one of the things I have been thinking about in terms of the NATO budget, just put this out there, when the USA says about how much the Europeans are contributing to NATO, is the USA taking into account their entire defence budget or just the proportion that is directed towards the North Atlantic Treaty? And I'm not sure if anyone's actually thought of that equation, because obviously America is a huge military equipped nation and is very mindful of what's going on in Southeast Asia, and particularly with China, and has alliances outside of Europe, say for example with Japan, Australia and so on. So just a thought. So I do get some of the sentiment that Europe has kind of gone along with it and not really taken the hints to heart enough, but getting chummy with Putin is not a great and smart approach. It really genuinely isn't. So I feel by the time that we get into the summer months, we're going to see a lot of people who would normally be very placid, very balanced. They could be Republicans, they could be Democrats, they could be Liberals, they could be Labour, they could be Conservatives. Whatever it is, whether it's people in Germany who are speaking up about immigration, a lot of people are going to be finding their voices. And I refer to my earlier point, it's not about left or right, it's about who holds the power and whether people feel heard. And if people don't feel heard, the emotion of Neptune and the furnace of Aries is going to come together. Now, of course, once Saturn comes along, we will see the potential for repression that we've just seen in Turkey, with about 1,500 people cleared off the street, and also a BBC reporter ordered to leave the country for just reporting on what's happening. So we're going to see some very hostile, frenetic, feisty, explosive, emotional energy playing out over these next 2 or 3 years, but particularly over the summer months of this year in the Northern Hemisphere. Now, just to reiterate that Neptune and Pluto are the solar system's slower moving planets, and therefore, some would argue that their influence is more collective than personal. But if you want to know more about how it will be for you, you need to know what sign and house they were in when you were born. So in my case, Neptune was in the deep dive in Scorpio, but it was in the first house. And that's really critical. So if you don't know that, please check out my free birth chart by clicking on the link beneath this video at www.patrickarundell.com, and you can go and download it. You'll get it straight away. It's cracking, it truly is. But this could, the collectiveness of Pluto could be very powerful in a constructive way. But let's just think about the energy of Uranus, because it's going into the air sign of Gemini. So Uranus very much about things happening quickly. It can be about freedom, independence, authenticity. It rules the sky. I feel it is the planet of astrology. Not every astrologer would agree with that, and I wouldn't therefore in any way be hostile to them, because people will connect to what works for them. So some people would say it's Mercury. I have read some people say it is Neptune itself. But because Uranus can be about breaking free of restraints, the air sign will ventilate its energy. Of course, it also is the co-regent, the modern ruler of the sign of Aquarius, which is an air sign. So by element, it is also enabled in the sign of Gemini. So it can be about rebellion, democracy. It can be about things happening really very, very, very fast. But of course it can be about futuristic things, and some of the futuristic things that we're dealing with are very scary, particularly if one or two or a small cadre of people seem to have all the power. That's not really great. But just be aware that Uranus, as I mentioned, can be very much to do with the more progressive energies of Aquarius, where Saturn is the more traditional energies. So the humanitarian energies that come from Uranus could find a voice in Gemini, I believe. But Neptune, we've talked about some of the principles of Neptune. I am concerned, genuinely concerned about health crises, but it can also be about entertainment and celebrity in some ways, but also, as I mentioned before, scandal. So that whole news cycle that seems to be so focused on, who's seeing who's broken up with who, it's going to be really interesting whether people's appetite for that continues. Chances are it probably will, but there may be some kind of change somehow in the mix. Like the amount of people who seem to fess up to extreme drug use, for example, or extreme alcohol use, does seem, with the confessional age we've been through with Neptune in Pisces, to become so overwhelming that maybe the appetite for that, the victimhood, is what's going to really be pushed off the back pages of the papers. But Pluto, well, we know Pluto is about power, we know it is about transformation, we know it rules the underworld, we know it can be about life and death, regeneration, can be about rebirth. It can be very ruthless, obsessive, secretive, for sure, dark, hidden, sinister, but it also is about evolution. So what we have seen in the first blushes of Pluto in Aquarius is not really the best of it, I don't feel. It's actually been sat on my Sun for the whole of that period. And just so you know, it's on the third house, so that's very much to do with my ideas. And probably me being a bit bolder about saying what I feel rather than being a bit more diplomatic. And every time I do say something that's a bit more personal, I do get a few comments moaning about it. But mainly I think people think that I am fair, even if they don't always agree. But it can be about wealth. And it can definitely be about money, big business. And what we've seen recently is some detective work. We've had the inclusion of a journalist on that Signal group, but that wasn't really the only story, because is it Das Siegel, the German newspaper, instantly just checked out all those people who are in that chat group and found all their names and addresses, including the defense guy's Russian email. You can't make it up how naive that all is, and the fact that all that personal information hasn't been deleted, they haven't thought about the responsibilities of having that kind of level of responsibility, is just very, very worrying. But of course Pluto can be about killing, murder, genocide. We've seen genocide in Ukraine, we've seen it in Palestine. It's not acceptable. So even under the auspices of Aquarius and You know, I saw a post by an astrologer only today saying, for all my idealistic astrology followers, you know, Pluto in Aquarius is not a walk in the park, and he's absolutely correct. But we are eventually going to see what is causing so much misery at the moment make way. You know, I feel it will be the people who are being born now with Pluto in Aquarius, and some of the people who had it born when they were born in Sagittarius particularly, they're going to be the new leaders who have a much bigger vision that goes beyond just money and land control. They will see that freedom comes in different ways. So those are just some of my thoughts on that grand, or that golden triangle that's going to be coming. So they're going to all be interfacing, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But I feel Uranus and Pluto, both in air signs, it points towards people finding their voice and the collective and how we connect. And because Neptune in Aries is about the potential for passion, idealism in its highest form, that's very positive too. But also once Saturn aligns with Neptune, which becomes exact in February next year, just be aware that that can be where subterfuge and distortion around organisations, but also it could be industrial and also economic espionage. So just be aware of all these things, because Saturn is about structures and it isn't at its best in Aries. So just my take. It's a big subject, and I hope that it hasn't been too much to consume. I'm going to go through each of the zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what you can expect over these next just short of 8 months with Neptune in Aries. But yeah, if you've yet to have your birth chart produced, and for example, if you're on a cusp and you don't know whether you're a Taurus or a Gemini, because it does change, it's not set in stone how it is each year, go to that. You can download it, find out your ascendant, find out all your planetary angles or aspects, and all the key players, the big three, are featured in detail. It's terrific. Please see below for more. Aries, for you, particularly if you're born right at the start of the sign, certainly in the first 3 or 4 days, the impact of Neptune will be considerable. But if you're not an Aries, but you're an Aries ascendant or an Aries moon, the impact can be felt too, particularly if you're someone who's really invested in whole sign astrology, which essentially means that you consider your ascendant at 0 degrees Aries as well as the true point. So Neptune in Aries is going to be similar for you in terms of the collective experience, to be honest. But if you have got early born planets, what I would say is that if you have found in recent years that you've gone through a huge spiritual development period where you've learnt an awful lot more about your shadow side, your fears, your anxieties, the parts of you that in the past you may have found a little difficult to fully embrace, I feel it's going to be quite the relief, Neptune coming into your sign, because it's going to help you to get more into the present. It's going to help you to use all that huge backstory of knowledge and experience in the here and now. So the chances are you're going to become more verbal in expressing the talents and knowledge that you've been developing. But equally, because Neptune applying to the Sun can wash away something, if something isn't working in your life, and it does really depend on what house the Sun is in. So, for example, if it's in house 3, it could be that your beliefs could change quite radically with Neptune applying to the Sun, because maybe a different dimension will start to shape up, which will erode your old diktats and your old the things that you were previously adhered to and attached to as well. But then again, it could be that you would start to think about what you could manifest in terms of bringing more up from the depths of your being and expressing yourself with a lot more flair and imagination. So if you're that person who has had a hobby or a craft that you've been enjoying privately for some time, you may want to bring it to the center of your world, because the first house is your connection to the world. So it's going to be quite intoxicating for some people, and for other people, depending on that house number, it will be more complex. But in general, it is a time of deep shifts. And I think obviously once Saturn comes, it too only gets up to a couple of degrees in Aries. That is going to have more of an impact on people who are born right at the start of Aries in terms of house 1. But if you've got your ascendant or your sun later in the sign of Aries, you get the elemental connection, but actually these influences are still in house 12. So if you're still going through some deep changes or letting go of something that was no longer serving your greater purpose, or you're still grieving for something, or there's something that you're processing, or there's something you want to release, these next months, really through to the end of the year, are such a powerful time, but I think can be a very exciting time. So in terms of Pluto, new connections. In terms of Uranus, how you have connections can happen very quickly. But it could be that certain parts of your existence, if you have those early positions, could be deconstructed by Saturn and washed away by Neptune, but there is the potential for something to evolve from that process, even if it's painful, that's much more relevant to who you truly need to be. So think of your philosophies. I think that's a good one, but do think of healing. Don't be fearful of your emotional health. Embrace it. It is part of us. None of us is just our mind. We think it's all about our mind and of course our ego, but actually it is about our senses. It is about our physical well-being. And if we can get the trinity right between the physical, the emotional and the spiritual, that's when we really can do so well. The other thing I really love about Aries people is how you'll listen to your instincts. And I don't feel in popular astrology that gets any airtime at all. Completely amazes me. So that part of you that's very much a shrewd cookie when it comes to hunches, that's going to be turned up to max through the rest of this 8-month period. Website at www.patrickarundell.com, where you can download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Taurus, for you, in an intriguing way, Neptune moving into Aries evokes a kind of Pisces possibility, because for you it's house 12. Now, there are some in the astrology community who really resist joining together houses with zodiac signs. But the 12th house is a time of reflection. It can be a time when we're considering the more spiritual dimension of life. It can be very selfless, but it can also be where we might want to retreat a little bit. So if you're someone who has got an interest in healing, that interest is going to be turned up to max over the coming years. You may really surprise yourself by how much that really calls out to you. If you are someone who's always dreamt of living by the seaside or by a river or a lake, you can make it happen. If you're someone who has been yearning for some kind of deeper meaning to your life, you might find yourself checking out your local church, mosque, community group, something that brings a dimension to your world that you feel that you're lacking at the moment. But also for some Taurus people, there could be quite a strong desire to maybe escape. Maybe that's part of my nature in a way, that we moved away from the sort of bigger, more populated place to somewhere that's much quieter, and that is a very 12th house sort of Piscean desire to have that greater sense of ease and peacefulness. And if that's something that really is important to you, that's going to become a major part of your life in the years to come. Unfortunately, the 12th house can also be the sector of hidden enemies. This is a traditional astrology concept, and Neptune, because it can be tricky and it can be deceptive, does suggest that you do need to be conscious of who you're being too open with, too generous with. It's important to have boundaries, and Neptune's not very good with them. In that sense, it might be helpful that Saturn's coming along on the 26th of May through to the end of August to give a little bit more fabric to that part of you that can be very helpful and thoughtful to other people. The 12th house energy also makes me think about if you're someone who enjoys maybe doing more solitary pursuits, but ones, because you're often a very creative sign because of your Venus ruler, you know, if you have an interest or a hobby that you've long had but don't seem to get much time to invest in it, the chances are you're going to be much more active in doing so future forwards, whether it's photography of wildlife, whether it's painting, whether it's learning to play a musical instrument, whether it's working in an inner way to release old blockages. All of these things could be really absolutely thrilling, very, very exciting and illuminating. If you've often thought of becoming a healer, you know, if you've received some treatments and found it very powerful. I was just watching Alma, who the British lady who's just won all the awards for a biographical series that was on the TV, a sort of drama, very, very very real, with some very difficult topics that they've got through, not least her life, but really exposed herself in such an amazingly brave way. But I've just been watching her. She's gone to a spa and she's been having gong treatment, and it's just absolutely brilliant to see how much joy she was getting from that. It's not something I've done. Someone once said to me that they're going for an afternoon of Gregorian chanting, and I said, would that be "Come on you Reds"? Okay, they didn't laugh either. So everyone's got something different that pulls them in, and you may find that you get pulled in subtle ways to having a bit more space, time alone, being with people who are very soothing, reassuring, caring. If you're someone who's ever thought of having counselling, it's a great time to be thinking about that. But do be conscious of who you feel safe with and don't feel safe with, because unfortunately, I have to be really truthful with you, you could encounter some betrayals. And I think over the last couple of years there may have been some disappointments around certain friendships or long-term plans, and maybe now you need to go through the process of grieving some of those connections that didn't work out. Website at www.patrickarundell.com, where you can download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Gemini, feel a very exciting period is coming for you, especially if you've got early degrees in the sign of Gemini, because you're going to have Uranus coming along. Uranus in your 12th solar house has been really tough over the last 6 or 7 years, has left you feeling very on the edge, exhausted, your adrenals really maxed out, not been particularly easy. Then of course there's all that's been going on in your 10th house, your connection with the world, not least Saturn the last couple of years. Probably a lot of responsibility or potentially some grief in terms of work, line managers, the organisation you work in, not necessarily being particularly easy. But you did have the eclipse series and the eclipse of yesterday in the sign of Aries, which has been emphasising your friendships, your network, your connections. And Neptune comes in on the back of that, and that's really potentially very beneficial. It's just that your ruler on this event is in retrograde when it begins, and it's still in that very worldly part of your chart. So I would say that Neptune in Aries is very idealistic, but you might not on this particular ingress of Neptune through Aries get an enormous amount of opportunity to embrace that, because the 11th house can be about our future plans, our connections, our higher drivers that go beyond the material world. And Neptune in some ways would be great for all of that, but of course Saturn's going to come along and ask some very telling questions from the 26th of May through to the end of August. So if you are setting your sights on something that you do feel gives you a kind of connection to something that's really very, very important, could be around a group situation. So if you're someone who's inspired by particular beliefs, connecting to others can be something that really is very exciting for you. But the 11th house can be friendships, and Neptune can be tricky. So just be conscious of that, but particularly I feel for you once Saturn applies into Aries from the 26th of May, it's not necessarily going to be all bad, but it's certainly asking you to be very realistic about your long-term plans, whereas this particular phase of Neptune could see you being much more idealistic. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Cancer, Neptune moving into your 10th house suggests 10th house can be about goals and ambitions, our connection to the world at large. If you have planets right at the start of Cancer, it's possible that you may be a bit confused about what to do. The energy of the players in Pisces may have made you much more aware of a part of you that may have got sidelined a little bit recently, particularly with the eclipse series that's been going on in Aries, and maybe the North Node as well. Maybe you reached for the sky in terms of some physical prizes, but now you may be reconsidering whether they actually do serve your purpose. So if you're a natural born bohemian and you've got early planets in Cancer, I think really through to the end of this year, you may find yourself constantly churning around in your mind. Are you doing something that really inspires you, or are you going through the motions in order to receive the financial package, but that actually drains you? It really is soul destroying in a little way. So once Saturn arrives on the 26th of May through to the end of August, that process is going to get even more intense, particularly if you're right at the start of Cancer. Now, in a more constructive way, if you are someone who's got great talents, photography, film, graphic design, and you want to raise your profile, you're interested in fashion, you're a musician, Neptune being right at the top of your chart is your opportunity to mesmerize people with your stupendous range of abilities. So if you're a very self-expressive person, this can unlock a lot of talent that is ready to come out and find a bigger and more appreciative audience. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Leo, for you, Neptune moving into the 9th house could give you some real desire to break out and go to places you've never been before. Now, if that was some destinations that had some kind of historical context, you know, that were very enriching in terms of museums and buildings and history and maybe key events, that really could be quite exciting. But then, having said that, if you're someone who's a dedicated sun worshipper, getting away from it all and just lying on a peaceful beach may just be perfect for you too. But travel in your mind, traveling in your soul, traveling in terms of knowledge. If you've been someone who didn't have the opportunity to gain a higher education when you left secondary or higher school, you may want to go on a course, you may want to expand the amount of information, you may want to stretch yourself in some ways. What are the challenges? Well, if you've got any kind of litigation going on, just be cautious, because Neptune, of course, can mean that the 9th house is about the contract, and it may mean that who you're dealing with doesn't have the same intentions as you, and that means that things can get vague, or is someone being a bit tricky or darn right dishonest. So if you're thinking of buying something, the biggest thing that most of us buy is a property, perhaps followed by a vehicle. So if those big ticket items are on your particular list of desires at the moment, don't get too swept, Neptune, away with how it can transform your life. Stay very earthed about it. Once Saturn turns up on the 26th of May through to the end of August, some reality checks can come in, particularly around relationships. You know, you need to be with people who lift, not deplete. Neptune can wash away. Just be conscious of that through till the 10th of December, Leo. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Virgo, for you, Neptune moves into the 8th house. The 8th house can be extraordinarily and exquisitely devotional. If you're someone who really has got a connection with someone that you're enjoying, and you've come through Saturn being in your 7th house, you want to make that next step into a deeper alliance. You got it all to go for. Then again, of course, Neptune in the 8th house could be about how you can use your attention to detail in a way that gives you some kind of recompense financially, because it can be about investment. You may find yourself being interested in ecological investments, maybe something to do with water purification, for example. But the 8th house can be about legacies as well. You want to make sure that everything that's important to you is enshrined in a document that would be watertight, that can't be eroded by someone's nefarious intentions. But the 6th house Pluto for you is about practicalities. The 8th house is how we earn money. It's also where we're most connected, but it can be shared finances too. If there is any murkiness around those areas in your situation, you're encouraged to try to eliminate them as soon and as quickly as you possibly can. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Libra, Neptune moves into your 7th house. That's going to make you even more conscious of your connections to others in a really magical way. For some Librans, the next years ahead could see you forge an alliance with someone which really is absolutely divine. Because divinity comes from that spiritual connection. As much as fancying someone, as much as having those shared values, it's where we just align in that very peaceful but very engaging way. So that's the upside, that's the opportunity, particularly with Pluto in house 5, very much about sociability, demonstrating your charisma to the maximum. But you do have the ability to be very attuned to other people. When I've said that before, other Librans have pushed back and said, no, I'm very focused on what I need to do for me. Well, of course, it does depend on what house your sun is in. and what the shape of your chart is in general. And sometimes Libran people do have planets in Virgo or Scorpio. But Libra is the sign of relating. So whether that's something that is a big part of your life or not, your connections to others are going to be coming under a greater amount of scrutiny by the energy of Neptune. That's just inevitable that that is going to be part of the process. But if you did meet someone where it did seem that everything was absolutely idyllic, once Saturn comes along on the 26th of May through to the end of August, it is the case that it's going to be tested, but it doesn't mean to say it's going to be tested to destruction. But if you are in a relationship where someone just overrides your boundaries, doesn't really respect how you lean into their needs, that's something that could become more challenging to you, and you may have to work harder in saying what you want and asserting who you are. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. Scorpio, Neptune in the 6th house can in some ways be about where we are sacrificing, where we use our practical abilities in a way which is caring towards others. Another thing could be if you've got a job which isn't really very exciting, Neptune moving into the 6th house could start to see the enthusiasm that you're trying to muster even seep away. So it's important that whatever you're doing practically, it works for you. And of course the 6th house is about health. Neptune can be about bathing. It can also be potentially about going to a spa and releasing the toxins within you that we can't necessarily see. Very Neptunian, but that's an opportunity for you. If you're someone who's got a calling that you feel you've never really exploited, so you may be very successful, but there may be something else that actually really is deeply attractive to you, you may find that the draw towards that in the years ahead can be very strong indeed. But in terms of your physical vitality, particularly with Saturn coming on the 26th of May to the end of August, you do need to fortify your defences. So that means trying to be much more conscious of the different elements that you're ingesting, and as ever with Neptune, it can be the things we don't necessarily see, because that can see you more sensitive to your energy being affected by the different additives or things that are used like emulsifiers to pack out and big up and make things stodgier or looser or whatever it is. It's in virtually everything these days that we consume. And a friend of mine was in America a few years ago and very much into whole foods, and he said he was surprised by how many whole foods in America were fortified. Fortification can be a very good thing, say folic acid, but if it's fortified or there are sugars added or a different type of agents to do this, that and the other, that's not always such a good thing. So anything that's processed or super refined is probably not going to be so good for you. So work on the whole concept of purity, but especially around purity about the things you don't necessarily physically see, because when Saturn's coming along, it is going to be more scrutinizing rather than the more invisible energy of Neptune. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. Sagittarius, as Neptune made its way through the delicate 4th house of your situation, it was certainly helping to burnish your understanding of the more emotional dimension of life. But you are a fire sign, and Neptune arriving in the fire sign of Aries, your sister sign, gives you a chance to really be much more outgoing. Something that you have in the past have had quite the reputation for. So your creativity is going to start to rev up. If you are someone who's passionate about demonstrating your charisma and talent, maybe in terms of performance or music, anything really which is much more connecting to others and helps you to demonstrate your sparkle, you've got it all to go for. It really can be a glorious set of years ahead. Now, of course, because Pluto is now in your sector of everyday communication, you can get the message across with a degree of assertion, and people can see you as someone having conviction, and that mixed with that talent is an awesome combination. What about Saturn? Well, when Saturn turns up on the 26th of May through to the end of August, it is going to test out what you start from now until then. It's asking you to make sure that whatever has a good potential about it also has the application, the discipline and the drive to make it come through. So you may find yourself being find your imagination being very vivid from here on in, but if you want something to come into actual being, it will require perhaps the energy, the following wind of Saturn, to really help push it on to the next stage of development. But if you wanted to get out and about, meet up with people more, if your interest is in terms of the arts or anything to do with flair, then this is a time for you to shine. But if you're just content to be much more social, perhaps you want to have some more romantic opportunities come into your world, Neptune can certainly arouse your appetite and imagination. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Capricorn, for you, Neptune moves into the 4th house. This could make you very sentimental around your home, family and emotional situation. But if you live in an environment that jars on your senses, too noisy, too quiet, whatever it might be for you, Neptune over the years to come is going to be pushing you to try to find the place where you can achieve that real serenity, because the 4th house can be where we retreat, can be where we protect ourselves. Everyone's home has that physical side to it, but you could be living somewhere at the moment, it could be very nice, but if it doesn't feel so good, that's going to be something that starts to eat away at you. Then again, if finding a home which gives you just the basic form of protection that many people might just assume is the norm, and it isn't necessarily the case for everyone, that's something you're going to really be hoping to achieve. Now, once Saturn, your ruler, joins up with Neptune on the 26th of May, that will give you a chance to show your natural grit, determination and application to change where you're living for the better in the time ahead. But to be honest, if you're in a property or a home where maybe there are some drainage issues or where the roof's not quite as solid as it could be, this is a time to get busy in terms of building your defences, making sure the gutters are cleared of leaves, that if you've got some drains, that you can make sure that any sludge is not going to back up and cause any mischief for you. If you've got a dripping tap, it could be adding to your water bill. These may seem all very practical issues, but you might be amazed about how much Neptune can affect us, particularly in a natal chart. If we move into a property and Neptune's in house 4 or on the 10th house cusp, you may have issues keeping out the wet. But also the 4th house is about our emotional sphere. If you're someone who's quite a dry Capricorn, very very hard working. You make sure that everything's in trim in terms of your finances and so forth. You're going to be asked with Neptune in the fourth house to become much more conscious of how things feel, the more sensitive realm of life. And it can be an area of tremendous growth for goats over the next 14 years or so. You may also find yourself wanting to add to your family. A more sentimental side of your nature can come up. You could find that you become more of a hub for helping those who are less fortunate in your immediate community. So the fourth house, very much about feelings and where we live, our immediate environment, and anything to do with water. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Aquarius, Neptune through Pisces. Wow. Foundations. Have your foundations at times felt like they were being washed away? Did you feel that your values, often an important part of your nature, were at times being assaulted, not by people telling you directly what they felt, but more by spinning an opposition to you? Have you found that your generosity, perhaps to people who are less fortunate and good causes, hasn't always been appreciated and respected as much as it could have been? Have you found with the last couple of years that Saturn has compounded some of the limitations and downsides of Neptune in your second house? I think a possible answer is there has been some of that, but there also has been you shining when it comes to demonstrating generosity. Because giving to a good cause, particularly if your own finances are somewhat limited, is a very noble thing. So even if at the present time it does feel that some things have slipped through your fingers, don't spend too much time reproaching yourself, because what you've shown is true spiritual leadership. Same with Saturn. I think we can all say that the cost of living has gone up for many of us, and Saturn has brought the reality of that home. But what it's also done is made you much more conscious of what is truly important, whether it's sitting with a friend or a close family member, having a nice cup of tea. That actually is the most valuable thing of all, when in the past it may have been something different. So with every challenge comes an opportunity and also personal growth. So what will Neptune bring in the third house for you? Well, we have to think that the fire energy of Neptune can give your ideology a furnace, but for you it's also the third house, which is a very Gemini-like energy. So your ability to think quickly, express yourself in snippets, but in a way that encapsulates a whole argument in a very crisp manner, is definitely going to be heightened. But you can also add that cerebral quality, which is part of your nature, that inherent sensitivity, which is a great package to have, where you can articulate yourself but also be in touch instinctively with what things are truly important. So it's your beliefs, the third house, your connection with your neighbours, the third house, with siblings, your community. All of those things can be very exciting. And if you're someone who's got that proverbial book inside of you that you've never quite had the confidence to start writing, you may be surprised by how much more productive you become over the next few years. For sure, your traditional ruler Saturn is going to provide some tests and challenges for the period from 26 May to the end of August, and then again at the start of next year. But Saturn's going to be speeding on quite quickly next year in terms of penetrating deeper into the sign of Aries. And it will ask you to be mindful of how your views and how you express them are perceived. There may be some challenges around modes of transport, But what I feel is really lovely about Neptune in the third house is the concept of flights of fancy. Why shouldn't we have some moments when we can trip the light fantastic, but particularly around creativity? So whether it's through that book, through poetry, through journaling, through sketching, through doing something online that's very creative, starting a small business, this gives you a huge opportunity to mix flair and talent, but also your persuasiveness with the help of Pluto in your sign to get that message across with a real brevity too. Download your free natal chart. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely don't think there is a better one. Please see the link below for more. You can also check out at my site, having a one-to-one with me, having a recorded video reading, or my special offer on my printed charts with 30% off. Please see the link below for more. So Pisces, if there's something that you've been working on for some while that's very creative, imaginative, individualistic, and you're waiting to see some solid results, where you could do in the latter part of this year, it is true that the more spiritual or more inspirational energy of Neptune needs to stand scrutiny with the more testing energies of Saturn. But if you have put the hard work in, you have put the application and the perspiration in to match your natural talent, finally you can start to see things shaping up as this year comes to a close and 2026 begins. Pluto also suggests that the things you've been doing behind the scenes can be very valuable. That's one of the things with your sign. You don't always necessarily seek direct recognition. You can be someone who provides very, very valuable services, sensitive observations, delicate touches which are so critical, and all that hard work and effort can start to come into fruition for you. Unfortunately, if something hasn't been thought through or worked on enough, or it's just the world has changed, or anything creative that you feel has prospects, could be tested by the brutal reality of the market. So if it is something that isn't quite chiming with other people, you may need to amend it. There may be some adaptations that are required, and that could be testing. One of the things I would say with Neptune in the second house, it's time to get really serious about sugar. And as you know, probably, sugar is my big downfall. So sugar for the next few years could be something that you find very mightily difficult to resist. But it may be precisely the thing that if you can get your system free of it, it will help you to feel so much better. So this would be a great opportunity to grow your own veg, cook from scratch, and just make your diet as wholesome and natural and earthy as you possibly can, despite the watery element. So water, obviously, if we ingest it, important to drink good water, and where possible not out of plastic bottles, because the plastics is all going into our system. So microplastics is a massive problem for the world at large. So purity is the order of the day about what you eat and drink. But if you have really applied yourself in a wholesome way, some kind of foundational point could build up where you blend your talent with your application. Thank you so much for joining me for this Neptune Deep Dive special. Please do check out your free natal birth chart at www.patrickarundell.com. I really genuinely think it is the best one out there. Or if you'd like to get your free daily written horoscope fired to your device each morning, or you'd like to get your free daily moon horoscope based on your personal birth data fired to your device each morning, please go to my website or at www.patrickarundell.com.